So the goal is to get report backs from each of the small groups, right? I mean, focusing on 3 to 4 concrete areas of agreements or solutions or next steps, right? Get those all up. Have a little bit of processing about that. Food will be here at some point, yes? Yes, there's food here. And then we'll close. All right, so as you listen to the report backs, be thinking about, hey, that's something that I could do, or that's something I want to be part of, or that's something I could get some other folks rallying around, right? Be thinking about how to keep moving this forward. Okay? All right, so we want to have maybe Fernando and Wendy. That's right, that's right.
You want to go up there?
Sure, you want to come up? Sure. All right, they had the Displacement and Gentrification small group. Yeah? All right, round of applause for Fernando Martin from the Council of Community Housing Organizations. He's the co-director.
Can I throw this up here?
And Wendy Click, who is the Community Organizing Peer Advocate at Hospitality House. Also Jackie Jenks, who is the Executive Director of Hospitality House. Apparently this is a trio, maybe even a quartet. All right?
Could be, possibly.
Okay.
All right.
Away.
All right. So we talked a bit to introduce stuff around what's going on in the mission, what's going on in the Tenderloin, what HESPA has been working on, and open it up. I put some bright green little squares, what we called our gems of things. I think I might go over, as Joseph said, say 5 things, but we have a bit more. But we'll be quick. I think the thing that really resonated with folks is saying we need a moratorium on evictions.
Right.
That, and talking about a state of emergency. As the slideshow at first said, there are emergencies when you can call for a moratorium on these things. And so that was our kind of starting point. We talked a bit about the details that go with evictions, the need for a lot more organizing, tenant outreach, education, just even knowing what a 3-day notice is. Does that include weekends? I don't know. Somebody here can help me with that. Where to go, who to go to for help. You want to do some others and we can go back and forth?
Sure. So SRO preservation, like the SROs that are turning into tourist hotels. So start preserving those SROs for folks that live in them now. And the need for multifaceted strategy to protect tenants. Land trust to preserve the buildings that are here in the Tenderloin and the Mission. And protect encampments.
So we talked a lot about affordable housing and the need for affordable housing, but we kept going back to it has to be multifaceted. It's not just about, if we build some more affordable housing units, that's going to be the only solution, right? But within that, within the discussion about needing affordable housing, we talked about the need for 100% affordable housing, and then within that, how many of those units, what percent, what kinds of buildings are going to serve folks who have been homeless. And so where we've ended up is with holding the mayor accountable to housing 8,000 people in the next few years with primarily with new units, and that this idea of homeward bound tickets, take a bus somewhere else, that doesn't count, Mr. Mayor. We need to build 8,000 units, and that's a pretty lofty goal, right? That means we're going to have to talk about, or the mayor's going to have to talk about where to fund it, how to fund it. But it has been a big shift in the last few years in which the affordable housing that we build, that the organizations that I work for build, they're not being asked to do the amount of housing for homeless folks that they used to be doing. They're not, there hasn't been funding for 100% supportive housing buildings, and all of those things need to be discussed.
So maybe we can send the mayor somewhere.
Apparently he got stuck somewhere yesterday on a bus and couldn't make it to the.
Homeward bound for elected officials, that's something.
Yeah, I would say no more big developments, and also stop short-term rentals, because short-term rentals take away from our folks and displaced people that live here in San Francisco.
Maybe the last thing I'll talk, as mentioned, is the question of the encampments and the legislation that is currently moving forward around some standards to prevent those sweeps, to make sure that there are exits and places for people to go, is really critical. Oh, thank you.
Any other things that stood out for that group on displacement and gentrification?
Well, just think for people with disabilities, there needs to be some thought put into how they're treated as well, because they get support, and I know that some of the landlords now are saying they won't take vouchers or they won't take Section 8 or whatever. So just people with disabilities also need to have some consideration in this.
Okay, folks hear that? I don't want to be especially sensitive to the most vulnerable among vulnerable people.
Sir?
Right?
I
Yes.
would like to say, I'd like to touch on that no more than 30% of our income, or to a low-income person. I would like that because I live in a low-income housing, but it's more than 30%. And so I would like to, so for low-income housing, I would like to maybe see that
Okay.
across the board,
Okay?
30%.
Where's yours up?
It's the bottom right there.
Bottom? Okay, all right, I like that. All right, any others?
There
Okay,
needs to
group
be a
two.
concrete, I think there needs to be a concrete length of, an established length of moratorium on the, moratorium on evictions, at least 1 year.
Okay,
Not just a moratorium, but at least 1 year.
all right, so time, how long? Okay, gotcha?
10.
All right, okay, we're gonna auction it out, all right? All right. Group two, Colleen, emergency services. We need to take, and I think the plan is to compile the information and get it out to people. So let's make sure that everybody's got their contact information on the sign-in sheet. All right, and so we want to disseminate the information back out. All right? Okay,
So I don't have all of this
why not?
because I'm bad. Because there was an emergency.
Okay. What can we do about that?
But it's, I don't, you can punish me later if you want to, but, so we were, I'm gonna present the three gems, sort of idea. Just as an overview, we had actually three, because I'm Bilal, I'm including you as a speaker. Where is he? Three great speakers. Bilal talked about his perspective as on the Navigation Center as someone who is an expert at that place as you're there. We also had Kathy Trajeri from ECS talk a bit about the Navigation Center model and how that model doesn't have to just exist at this one building, but needs to be replicated throughout the shelter system. And right now we have a shelter system where one shelter kind of has all the resources and the others don't have access to that. So more housing exits as well as more ability to get into shelter. And Amy, who is here, there she is, talked about some of the work that she's been doing around shelter, around establishing shelter at Warmwater Cove as an additional navigation center space. Around bathrooms and access to basic hygiene with some of the encampments, and also talked to us about a couple pieces of legislation that are coming up. Supervisor Compos's legislation around navigation centers that's being heard tomorrow, and Supervisor Avalos's around the response to encampments that is not been calendared yet, but will be coming up soon. And I think that our takeaways is that there seems to be a lot of confusion around how to help people, or how to get those who are homeless access to the real basic services that they need. So even the most simple thing of seeing someone who's struggling on the street, it's really hard to know what to do and how to respond. And I think that's a function of the fact that there aren't enough services, which is why everything can seem like a wrong door. We also talked about this concept of wanting to establish really basic services like restrooms and shelter, not as an end in and of itself, but as a means to an end, and that letting that means or that vehicle to the end be helping reestablish the human dignity for folks that are on the street right now. And that is needed if we're going to move people, if we're going to help people that are homeless, we need to do it in a way that uplifts their human dignity, and that doesn't criminalize them or force them to be outside without any sort of access to the basic things that we all need in order to survive. Is there anything I'm missing? And I had to pop out for a minute because we had a little crisis I had to deal with, but from the group, anyone want to fill anything else in? Yes,
There was
Amy.
a question about who you could contact if you saw somebody in crisis on the street. There was a nice reflection on someone might not actually necessarily be in crisis if they just look downtrodden or whatnot, so be mindful of that. But I just wanted to put this number out there. It's the Mobile Crisis Treatment Team, and it's 415-970-4000. And that's a number that you can call 415-970-4000 during certain hours if you see someone in crisis, and they have a multidisciplinary staff providing psychiatric crisis intervention services for adults. And their hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 11 p.m., and then also on Saturdays, noon to 8. But there is an extra support there before you would necessarily call the police some kind of altercation.
Can you repeat that number? It's written up there on the board?
Yep.
And Mobile Crisis is calling us because they only have one van, and we're concerned. We do mental health crisis response. Folks in Turnerland mostly, but now we're getting in Soma and a mission as well. And our number is 415-881-8278.
And what's this?
Concern.
Concern. So that's called CONCRN. We do mental health crisis response. And we also have a mobile app.
So, thank you. And we're really excited about doing more to expand the type of emergency services that are available. We want to know what's available now so we can help people now if we see them, but I think there is a recognition that there isn't enough, and we need to do more, and I think that's the next step that we identified. Thanks.
I would thank you for that report, Colleen. I would also say, and just echoing some of what we heard in some of the groups, that let us not underestimate that sometimes the person that's needed to respond in a crisis is you. Right? So sometimes just one human being to another, right, is the emergency response. So I don't want us to lose sight of that. Don't let that perceived lack of knowledge about what's available in the system blind you to the fact that what this is really about is one human being reaching out to another human being. Right?
But bottom line is that the city needs to provide more toilets in the neighborhoods, because if we do, then we we take care of the problem. I mean, right now, people don't have any other way than to relieve themselves wherever they feel they have some privacy.
I got you. I'm not diminishing that. That's why it's on the list.
All right.
Okay? All right. Thank you. Number 3, let's see. Criminalization and use of force. All right. Lisa Marie? All right.
Like I'm on The Price is Right. I mean, so hi everybody, I'm Lisa Marie. I work at the Coalition on Homelessness and the Human Rights Work Group, and I have the honor of facilitating the criminalization small group which met across the way. And so we started with a little bit of a presentation around what does criminalization look like in terms of homelessness and street services experience, mostly with law enforcement. And so we talked a lot about some research that we've done at the Coalition on Homelessness in terms of the number of citations that people get for what we call and what is called anti-homeless laws. So any laws that make it illegal to sit, sleep, rest, or eat in public. And so Kelly in her introduction had talked about the fact that San Francisco leads the state with laws that prohibit these life-sustaining activities. So we were definitely number 1 in the state in those laws that criminalize the existence of poor people in public. And so some of the things that we talked about were the numbers of citations that people get, what happens when people don't pay their citations, because oftentimes people can't pay their citations. So we talked about how that will entrench a person into poverty and homelessness, making it impossible to get a job, making it impossible to even get housing in some cases or public benefits. We also talked about the toll that harassment and constant interaction with law enforcement or police will have on a person. And so we also heard some research and some statistics from Poor Magazine regarding the impacts of property confiscation around the sweeps and what that has had on street-based people. So not only has every single person in their study been unable to get back any of the property that was confiscated from them, but in most cases we're talking about medicine, IDs, birth certificates, family heirlooms, really personal items that even if we can put a monetary value to it, can never be replaced. So on top of the entrenchment in poverty, on top of the harassment and the trauma that people are constantly experiencing, then on the sort of third piece of it that we talked about was the police and state-sanctioned executions and murders that now street-based people are having to be concerned about and fear. So we talked about the link between housing instability and Alex Nieto, Amilcar Lopez Perez, and Luis Góngora, the most recent police murder. And so we talked about how the trauma and the constant experience of harassment and police in your face every day out on the streets, that sort of everyday trauma matched with the extreme trauma of police murder is creating a state of emergency and a crisis when it comes to criminalization on the streets. So that was how we started, and then we had a pretty intense dialogue that was not nearly as detailed as some of the other dialogues, but certainly came up with a lot of really important solutions in different places where we explored what we could be doing to respond. So I'm going to name just a couple of them. One of the things that we talked a lot about is the role of harm reduction in terms of street-based people in criminalization. So not just the decriminalization of drugs, although we did talk about that as something that's very necessary, but also how do we just continue to respond to the needs that people have on the streets in terms of their survival, making sure that they have what they need, but also reducing the harm that they experience every day. So we also talk about legislation as a type of harm reduction. That there are certain types of legislation that we can be implementing that's reducing the harm that people are experiencing when they're in the camp. So we talked about the Navigation Center legislation, we talked about John Avalos' legislation about responding to the camps, and so people were really excited about it, but also acknowledged, again, we're talking about harm reduction. We also talked about seriously mentally ill folks. And the number of people who are seriously mentally ill who are being criminalized and locked up in our county jail and then released onto the streets and then sort of caught up in a cycle of not being able to get any sort of services and then further deteriorating, their mental health further deteriorating when they're experiencing criminalization. So we talked about the need for responding to people's mental health needs on the streets. We talked a lot about how do you react without calling the police. That was our sort of number one solution, is how do we get people in San Francisco to stop calling the police on homeless people no matter what. And so we talked about how do you intervene when someone is escalated. You know, we all have a ton of de-escalation skills. So we talked about the need for stop minding your own business, but start minding other people's business and butting in when there's escalation. If someone's in psychological distress, get them support and help. Don't just let them deteriorate so that someone then calls the police on them. So we talked about that. We talked about how important it is that we engage our own compassion to be able to respond to street-based people when they're in the states that then end up leading to the police being called or law enforcement coming in to respond. We also talked about what is crime and redefining this notion of crime and what are crimes. So again, we talked a lot about drug use. We talked about sitting, sleeping, sit lie, right? Sidewalk obstruction, open containers, these things that are considered crimes only because people don't have a home. That is, when people are inside, those things are not crimes. And so we talked a lot about that the notion of crime is also sort of entangled with homelessness. That actually is not criminal activity at all. You're just a criminal for being homeless and engaging in these activities. So we really deconstructed that quite a bit and talked about what it would mean to redefine this notion of crime. And then the last thing we talked about is restorative justice, and what does it mean to implement an alternative to criminalization and an alternative to the punitive system that we currently have. And so we talked about stigma, we talked about oppression, we talked about the ways that we as a society in San Francisco have sort of adopted a mentality of criminalization. So we talked about more than just law enforcement, but we talked about security guards, bid officers, shelter workers, sometimes social workers, the way that people just embrace this mentality of criminalization because of stigma and oppression and then reenact it on people all the time. And so in terms of restorative justice, we talked about completely getting rid of that mentality, not just in our nonprofit world, but in our city in general. And we talked a lot about compassion. And we talked a lot about that being a necessary response and a form of restorative justice that we can take as a city to be able to respond and turn the tide towards criminalization. Then, again, I mentioned it earlier, we did talk about the Avalos legislation in terms of responding to encampments, and we talked about the navigation centers, but we also talked about how legislation is really inaccessible to street-based people. And what does it mean to make legislation and legislative processes more accessible to people who are the ones who are receiving the impacts of these legislations as they get passed. So we had a conversation about what it means to really center in the voices of the people who are experiencing the criminalization every day, that often when these pieces of legislation are being drawn up or made, they do not include the voices of the people who are experiencing the constant harassment. And that often legislation only comes after really horrible things have happened, when actually these things are happening every day. And so those are some of the things we talked about. Anyone else from my group feel like they need to chime in? Anything I missed? Yeah.
Also, but making sure that, we remember special populations such as people of color, disabled individuals, and also mentioned the LGBT community, the sort of unique impacts that it has.
Yeah. It was also brought up, there's a lot of folks who are street-based who are HIV positive and experience a lot of stigma on that level too. Anyone else? Breakfast.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you. Yeah, you.
Okay.
You, Darnell.
Oh, I don't want y'all to forget that citation is basically fleecing the poor. But we only get a little GA check, and so every time we get a little money, it's taking that big chunk out of that little bitty, teeny, tiny poverty check.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like it's robbery. So you see how police cannot subvert the law, they enforce the law. That's
Yeah, so another thing we talked about was how a lot of people will not only receive one citation, but they'll receive many citations, even sometimes within a small period of time, like a month. Someone can receive up to 5 to 7 citations in a short period of time. And then what happens is they have a bench warrant out. And so ultimately, the mass citations create a mechanism for law enforcement to be able to take anyone in at any time if they want to, because likely people can't pay their tickets, likely they have at least one that's a warrant, and will then open them up to arrest. So that was another thing we talked about, just the use of mass citations as a mechanism to just ensnare all homeless people so that they can incarcerate whenever is most convenient. Anyone else? All right.
Thank you. All right. Any group 4?
Yep.
Yeah? All right. All right. Jennifer Friedenbach, Coalition on Homelessness, you're up.
All right.
So our group was talking about housing solutions, and it was a really great discussion. People had a lot of amazing ideas. The group was facilitated by Regina Bates. Regina, why don't you stand up? Regina's one of our powerful emerging leaders at the Coalition on Homelessness, one of our moms, and she did an awesome job. We had a panel that talked about a whole bunch of different areas around housing solutions. I don't think Tiny's here anymore, but Tiny from Poor Magazine. So we talked about more of a self-determination model, where poor folks are basically turning to people like perhaps some of the people in this room who are in our community that have access to large trust funds and money that they're not really talking about, but have all this money, and then use that to buy land in the East Bay, where they have 3 houses already, and they're going to be going up to 6, and started their own school for kids and did all this work that is still emerging and is a really very powerful model of self-determination. We had we had Beth from Compass, who I think is still here, maybe. Beth from Compass talk about the HESPA proposals, and those are in your packet around subsidies. And this is something that is used to really rapidly house people, and the subsidies for a short term, and for a lot of folks, they're able to then stabilize and take over the rent on their own. There was a lot of discussion about this in terms of it being a really good kind of interim solution, but not a permanent solution, because the money's going to landlords, and really what we need to be doing is owning the housing ourselves through housing trusts or through nonprofit housing or along those lines, so that it's permanent affordable housing, which leads me to the last speaker, which was Ivy Lee from Jane Kim's office. So in order to do this, what we're talking about on a large scale, really, and so I think for the Coalition on Homelessness, we want to at least double the amount of housing that we have for homeless people that's permanent, right? So we have about 6,000 housing units for homeless households right now, and we want to do another 6,000, right? So that's going to take money. And so Ivy Lee was talking about the various sustainable revenue sources that potentially are going to be going to the November ballot that could create this reality. So super exciting, and is also something that everyone can get really active on if it comes to fruition, in terms of trying to make sure that one or all of these things pass. And so one of them is a hotel tax. If they did a 1% hotel tax increase, it would generate about $27 million. If it's set aside for a particular thing, it would need 2/3 passage. So there's a lot of talk about how to do this in a different kind of way where it wouldn't require the 2/3 passage. The mansion tax is another thing that Supervisor Kim is looking at, which is would generate about $30 million, and that would be a real estate transfer tax. So it would kind of attack a lot of the real estate speculators who are buying properties, also go for the commercial properties. So if it was property over $5 million, it would do an additional tax. If it was $25 million, it would do a new thing there. That would generate about $30 million a year. And then the last thing is something that Supervisor Farrell is looking at, which we had discussion on around. That would be a sales tax that is regressive and hurts poor people, but would generate a lot more money. It would be $50 million. And that would be a 1/4 cent sales tax combined with a 1/2 cent for transportation. So we're losing a 1/2 cent of our sales tax. It would replace that, and then add a 1/4 for transportation, then add a 1/4 on top of that for homelessness. Totally dependent on whether the transportation people are cool with giving up a 1/4 of the sales tax they were going for and giving it over to homeless people. So there's a lot of kind of like moving parts, but these are all possibilities. And then people had all these other amazing ideas for revenue around. Well, there was an idea for a tax on the Google buses, but it would have to be linked to cost recovery. Someone brought up the soda tax again, recouping the Twitter tax, enforcing the Airbnb if they don't put the registration, having a high fine. So they have like 10 people on there without registration numbers, that would create $10,000 for the city, you know, in times whatever. Vacancy tax. So those were all different ideas that people had in the group. Also a bunch of ideas around really figuring out ways to engage community, on helping each other and how to develop that as a community in San Francisco. So we're looking out for each other, having culturally specific community building housing that is going for particular populations like folks with disabilities, and really trying to have this community where people are really looking out for and helping each other. Talking about needing more innovations, short-term innovations while we're all that permanent housing. So if we do all that stuff in November, all that housing is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a few years to get there, but we can get there, right? Because it has to be constructed and all of that stuff happening. So having some innovative stuff. St. Francis Village was one of the ones that was mentioned. Tiny homes was another one. So having these kind of innovative ideas in the interim while we're getting the housing there. And then having transitional subsidies so that we can have more of the housing ladder put in place. And turning nonprofits, current nonprofits into navigation centers. And so the shelters and the drop-in centers being able to have that, those navigation center resources instead of, as a way to try to take those innovations and then apply them to our current services. And so there was a lot of really good ideas. All of this takes a lot of work. And so one of the things, and I know Joe was talking about a little bit, but making sure everyone wrote down your emails so that we have everybody's emails, because what's going to happen is that, not just from this group in terms of next steps, but from this group, let's say, stuff goes to the ballot, or let's say there's people in this room who want to invest in homefulness and, get another few buildings going there. All of this is going to take a lot of follow-up, and so we want to make sure we can get back in contact with people. If stuff goes to the ballot on November, that's going to be huge. So that's going to be a huge lift in terms of trying to get us to get that passed and actually do what I talked about at the beginning of this, which is doubling the number of people that we have housing for in San Francisco, and going for a long way in really solving homelessness. That's what we want to do. And so that's it. Anyone have stuff to add from my group? We're all good? All right. Thank you very much.
All right. We might just keep us moving here. We might, if I stop talking, we can eat. All right. Okay, well, come on. That's enough of that kind of talk. So, why don't we open this up a little bit for folks to kind of reflect on things on the list that, captures you, something you'd like to work on, something missing, an effort you can see yourself getting involved in. Yes?
Well, I just have kind of a question or thought around criminalization and use of force. Well, so recently they amended the charter, right, to increase the number of police on the streets in San Francisco. And so I'm wondering if we're going to do, or maybe we could do like studies around if they're increasing citations since then to pay for their salaries, or, it seems like use of force has increased, the killings have all been since they increased the police charter. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely a good point. We've heard a couple of folks remark that, there's this insidious aspect of using citations and these quality of life, infractions. It's kind of a small business development approach for the police department. And really kind of emphasizing or bringing home that point about how incredibly expensive it is to be poor. That raises some ethical and moral questions about what kind of police force we want here in the city and county of San Francisco. Just down the street from us, is a federal halfway house at 111 Taylor, run by GeoCare, which is a subsidiary of the Georges Group, which is one of the 4 largest prison privatization firms in the world. You know, last year, that corporation made $250 million in profits, and their business is locking up black and brown people. That's what they do for a living. And so when we're having a conversation in our community, in our city, about the premise of restorative justice,
Well,
for
actually,
example.
Today at 5:30 at City Hall, Police Commission meeting.
Yes.
We're gonna have that.
In room 400.
Room 400.
For 400, that's right.
All right, so we can leave here and go to that police commission meeting. All right, thank you for that. But the point is, I mean, when we're having a conversation about restorative justice, when we're having a conversation about increased criminalization, of poor people, and again, that point that, zero tolerance for poor people is not the same as zero tolerance for poverty. And so, what do we want to do about that? That conversation, that discussion needs to happen in multiple places, in multiple ways, at multiple people, on multiple occasions. That is our individual and collective challenge, right? We don't have time to do one thing at a time. It's the economic system. It's our federal and state housing policy. It's our education system. Our child welfare system. In San Francisco, the city and county in San Francisco, we have one of the highest percentages of children in out-of-home placement of any county in the state of California. At the same time, at the state level, we have reduced the amount of time that poor parents can access substance abuse treatment, for example. So in this city and county, if you're a poor parent, you get your kids taken away, you don't have a lawyer, you ain't getting your kids back. That's the system we have. Same thing with citations and criminalization, right? So you get cited, you can't pay the fine, you miss your court date, all of a sudden you got a bench warrant, that starts to accumulate. Immediate transfer to a collection agency, what's that about in San Francisco?
Yeah.
All right, who are we funding? And all those things happening all around us. And so everybody has a job to do, right? I mean, everybody has a job to do. And it's wherever you see injustice. You see someone on the street that needs something. A lot of times, all they need is you. Right? They need you to make eye contact. They need you to reach out your hand. Right? They need you not to step over people. How many times we see police officers approaching us, do we feel safer or more in danger?
More in danger.
That is a problem for all of us. Right? That cannot continue. When Lisa Marie talks about the trauma, right, of knowing that our public institutions are responsible for summarily executing people on the street, that is trauma that affects all of us. At a minimum, that destroys, right, our faith in our own institutions. A society cannot continue to operate like that. And we are all victimized by that. And so our response must be not only individual but collective. Sorry, what was the question? And again, there are multiple fronts here, right? So we have our economic system. I mean, gentrification and displacement are not automatic. They are not inevitable. Right? These are byproducts of intentionality. Right? And it's hardest on communities of color and renter households, which is this community. The people who are getting locked up are black and brown people from District 10, which is Baby Hunters Point, and this one. The same 5 zip codes, year in, year out, have the lowest voter turnout, year in, year out. 94124, which is Bayview Hunters Point. 94134, which is Visitation Valley. 94112, which is the Excelsior, or 115, which is Western Addition. 94103, which is South of Market, and this one. 9 from 102. Right? The communities that need the political process the most tend to participate the least. At least one reason is we don't feel our voice is going to matter. We don't feel anything we do is going to make a difference. And so that turns out to be true when we don't participate. Right? We prove that. If we don't participate, then we're exactly right. Our voice does not matter. Our voice does not count. I'm old enough to remember my mother having to take a test to vote. Old enough to know one of the OGs in the room. All right? And that was not in Mississippi, that was in the north side of Chicago. The person giving her the test misspelled her first name. Her first name has 4 letters in it, R-U-T-H. So for me, voting is personal. Right? It is a site of struggle. Right? And there were people who were hung from trees, college students, who wound up buried in a dam somewhere in southern Mississippi, trying to help people exercise their own franchise. So the least I can do is show up sometime around election day. Because decisions get made whether I participate or not. So I don't want to make that voluntary. I won't give up my right voluntarily. They have to take it. That's what we're asking everybody here to do. Right? Is figure out that one thing you can do and do that. We got 75, 80 people in the room, so that's 80 things that are getting done. Even if they're the same thing, that still adds up. We'll take that. I mean, donate books somewhere. If people steal the books, that means more people are reading. We'll take that. All right? That's a good thing. All right? We have to educate and inform each other. We got to think of all the intelligence and the brain power that's in this room. So everybody can share something. Everybody has a gift to share with each other. You know, Tiny told that. The co-founder of Poor Magazine told us that. It is the poet warriors that we need. Not the warriors wearing blue. We have to transition ourselves from this whole notion of warriors versus guardians in our police force. And the fact is, the harder question for us, the harder thing to deal with, is that police come from somewhere. They're not just, they don't come from another planet. They grow up somewhere, they go to school somewhere, they live somewhere. They, better or worse, reflect all of us. That's the harder thing to deal with. We have absolved ourselves of our own responsibility. These are institutions that are accountable to us. For better or worse, they reflect the best or the worst of us. So it's our job. It is our fault when these institutions don't work the way that they're supposed to. Simple as that. That's the harder thing. We can't just blame rogue cops for being out of control. Somebody is going to ask us, well, Joe Wilson, where were you when all of this was going on? What did you do about it? I want to have an answer for that. So I am confident that everybody here has something to bring to the table. Everybody here has something to bring to the mix. You got a gift, you got a talent that you can share that's worth something. Artists teach us that not everybody sees the world through the same perspective, and that's a good thing. That's why we need artists in the world. Children teach us that nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. If you can imagine it, it can happen. If you can draw it on paper, it can come to life. And if you can dream, it can happen in your life. And all over the world, all over the globe, and in communities like this, children have stopped dreaming. That has immediate effects on all of us when our children stop dreaming, stop having the courage to dream. A society cannot continue like that. So I'm asking you, urging you, do something. Do anything, but do that. You have it within you. We all have that gift. There's that quote by Thoreau about most of us are living lives of quiet desperation and go to our graves with the songs still in them. Don't let that happen to you. And don't let that happen for someone else. Sing our song, right? Play your music. You're hearing it. Dance to that tune. That's what we need. Get your hand up and back.
I was just going to add to what you were saying about children dreaming, and I'm just thinking, like, if we don't solve the situation ourselves, and, you know, in a collective manner, then what are we going to leave our kids? Because I know that the violence is filtering into the elementary level. You see what I'm saying? And my 7-year-old is fearing police. And it's crazy. And she's like looking at the officials at school. Like, if they're going to beat me up all at school when I get to junior high school. So it's a real fear among children because adults can't even handle themselves. Political officials and law enforcement. And it's like, what kind of world we going to leave our kids after we gone? That's what I think does. And we got to change it quick. And we all got to do something. I mean, if you volunteer, say a kind word, open up the door. I mean, you have it, the God spirit within you, okay? To make the change. And that's all I think, you know, just to add to it.
Here, here. We have more police, we have more cops in our schools than we have guidance counselors. We have more licensed gun dealers in the state of California than we have high schools. We have more people in the penal system now than we have families in public housing, which means that the Department of Justice is now the largest developer of low-income housing for minorities in general and young black men in particular. That's the country we live in. We can do something about that. And it starts with owning what kind of community we want to have. And what kind of community member we want to be. That is all of us. You know, the rescue mission is in this room. All right, anyone else? I don't need a mic to start babbling, so yeah.
I've got a question.
Are you talking about next steps and actions or?
Next steps and actions. So we had at least one next step was the police commission.
Do you want me to cover the calendar real quick?
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy, for that unsolicited comment. We never met, right? And then Reg is up too.
All right, so we got tonight, it was already said, 5:30 is the police commission in room 400. What the police commission is doing right now is that they have 4 different use of force policies that they are revising. One of them is just the general use of force. The other one's the reporting requirements for use of force. So, you know, do they got to report it if they point a gun at somebody, for example? The other one is the use of firearms. And then the 4th one is tasers. So they're talking about introducing another weapon when we're trying to get them to use verbal de-escalation. And then the 5th thing that a lot of community members are pushing for them to do that they have not included yet is that we want them to have a general order on the crisis intervention team, which they have not implemented in San Francisco, which is supposed to be a team that uses de-escalation that responds when people, especially when they have sharp-edged weapons, instead of using weapons, they have a plan and a tactical plan and back away and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So those are, you know, kind of like the big things that are happening tonight. It's going to be a discussion tonight. It's not going to be a vote. The vote, there's going to be another meeting next week, and then probably a meeting in early June is when they take the actual vote. So that's a huge thing that also has a huge impact on the homeless community, especially around the tasers, because tasers are very dangerous when you're using on people who are elderly. And we know the homeless population is 25 years older than what their calendar age is in terms of all the different health issues. When people are on medications, when people have heart disease, all these different things that our community is disproportionately impacted by are the people who die when they're tased. And they're also the ones who most frequently come in contact with the police because they're living outside. So it's a really big deal as far as the Coalition on Homelessness is concerned. And so that's one piece. And then, of course, the crisis intervention team is supposed to be for people in psychiatric crises. We've talked about that. A lot of the police killings end up being people who are without housing, who are also in psychiatric crises, who are also people of color. So people of colors across the board, about half of them in the last 10 years have been people in psychiatric crises. So tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at City Hall, room 250, we've got the Board of Supervisors is considering legislation to add the 6 navigation centers. We worked with them to change that, as Campos talked about, around having a piece in there around equitable access to housing and requiring that the mayor come back and say exactly how he's going to house the 8,000 people he promised when he introduced the homeless department in the next 4 years. So we want to see some substance to the talking, and that's what is in the legislation. And so that would be awesome if that ends up being required, that they have to come back and actually do that. And leads into the other stuff we're talking about on the ballot initiatives. The mayor's blocking, cock blocking, is that the right word? But they're blocking, their office is blocking everything that everybody's trying to do. So we want to, force this, right? At 12 o'clock noon tomorrow, also, we're having a budget walk around. We're trying to get 400 more subsidies passed for homeless people next year, and trying to get baseline the 350 subsidies that happened last year. These are subsidies for single adults, for families, for people with disabilities, for the whole gamut, youth, and so show up at the steps on the Polk side at 12 noon and help us walk around and put pressure on the mayor's office and make a lot of noise and try to get them to do it. It's in connection with Mother's Day, and we're using that as kind of our theme and bringing Mother's Day gifts into City Hall. That's tomorrow at 12 noon, meeting on the steps of City Hall.
10 o'clock and 12 o'clock.
Yeah, the hearing's at 10, the walk-around's at 12. Two other things. If you want to get involved in the ongoing, all the things that you've heard today, a human rights work group is every week at the Coalition on Homelessness on Wednesdays at 12:30. On Tuesdays is Housing Justice. These are working groups that are actively trying to get human rights respected on the streets and pass legislation to do that, and go to Sacramento and fight for housing, and where we, talking about the ballot initiatives and all that stuff in Housing Justice on Tuesdays. So we invite everyone to get involved in a regular basis. Moving way forward, next week, May 11th, is Police Commission again at 5:30. May 18th, there's going to be a forum, Weapons of Mass Displacement, Homeless Sweeps, Police Killings, and San Francisco's Crisis of Gentrification. Hosted by Fernando Marti is putting that together. And so if people want to come to that forum, he has flyers, and there was flyers at the front desk, and it's on your calendar. All of this work takes funding. Coalition on Homelessness is kind of a notoriously broke organization, very hardworking but underfunded, and we do not, we basically rely on individual donations. So bocce ball, super fun, Saturday, May 21st. If you're broke yourself, that's okay. Get people to sponsor you and put together a team and come out and support an organization that's working really, really hard and have fun. It's an aquatic park. Always beautiful, and you got the view of the bay. It's really nice, and anybody can play bocce ball, even if you're 3 years old. And it's just like bowling, but easier. And then for the budget stuff, again, we're trying to get all these subsidies. We're also trying to get another $2 million in prevention to keep people in their homes, pay for back rent. We still have about half of our tenants
are going up against these awful landlords that are kicking them out for nothing with no representation. And so we need more legal assistance, but we also need outreach to the tenants. We have also, those are the ones that are fighting it. All the evictions altogether, half of the people aren't even responding. So we need to also do a whole bunch of tenant rights education because folks are leaving unnecessarily and losing their rent control units, and it's really, and ending up in these really awful situations. And so we want to also get a mediation program for public housing and nonprofit housing so that there's not a whole process of evicting people out of their housing and back to the streets and that circular thing that happens. Those are things that we're trying to get happening. There's the all-day budget on June 13th at the Board of Supervisors, and an ongoing struggle around the budget that, as we do more actions, we'll keep you posted. There'll be another action in June as well around the budget. And then on June 22nd is when they do the final budget deliberations on the add back, where that's when the Board of Supervisors decides what they're going to fund or what they're not going to fund. What's going to happen this year? They're going to decide, are we going to put another 120 police officers on our streets next year? Are we going to, spend all of our general fund money on paving streets? Or are we going to invest in people and keeping people in their homes and housing San Franciscans and keeping San Franciscans housed? Those are the deliberations that happen in the budget process. We have a $9 billion budget in San Francisco. We got a lot of money. So we want to redistribute that wealth in San Francisco towards ending homelessness, and that's what we try to do through the budget process. And so those are opportunities to get involved there. You have a lot of detailed information in your packet that covers all of this, but these are the upcoming things. Thank you.
All right. May 18th? We're good? All right, so I also put up here for the yes on Prop C. So
thank you, sorry. Yeah.
Right, the inclusionary housing increase, I see your hand. So Saturday, May 7th. This Saturday, May 7th, at the Women's Building, 3543 18th Street. That's on 18th Street between Valencia and Guerrero. Starting at 11 a.m., Housing for All. It's going to be the campaign rally for Prop C. So come on out, get involved, pick up some more information, talk to your neighbors. Even if you don't live in the city like me, you can still walk precincts, you can make calls, or you can turn people out.
We'll be walking precincts, so the more the merrier. Come walk a precinct, drop some stuff on doors, meet your neighbors.
Here. The other announcement I wanted to make, so Hospitality House has a community organizing work group that also meets on Wednesdays, a couple of hours after, is it human rights work group? Is that the right thing? Yeah. Right? So we meet on Wednesdays between 2:30 and 4 at 290 Turk. It's an opportunity just for local residents to come together and figure stuff out. That's what we try to do. So this next Wednesday, May 11th, we're going to have something called Talking Tech in the Tenderloin. We have organized these informal roundtables between community residents and tech workers, just to get people talking to each other. Right? Remarkable things happen when people just start talking to each other. So next Wednesday, May 11th, 3 to 4:30 p.m. at 290 Turk. We're going to have that Talking Tech in the Tenderloin. All right, so come on out for that. Yes, young man in the back, you had your hand up. Operation Concern.
I do still have another event on Saturday, but I don't want to compete with your
That's great. Thank you very much, sir, for that self-censor. Appreciate that. Oh, well, wait a minute, he's not done.
Every Saturday, so we have compassionate response training at 375 Eddy Street. People who want to be more involved in responding to crises and developing relationships with people who don't have enough.
Okay, so it's every Saturday, 375 Eddy Street?
That's it.
Okay. All right, so you're right next to the Cadillac?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well done. Anybody else? Wendy, did I forget something? Yes, I did.
No, just wondering if you want to get involved in the Tenderloin in their boat. They have a nonprofit or like a little get together. It's called the Tenderloin Boat at 234 High Street. That's the Faithful Falls. It's going to be a brainstorming session versus plus a recruitment for a precinct walk here in the Tenderloin. So that's 234 High Street, Faithful Falls, Thursdays at 6:30. 6 o'clock.
All right, Thursdays at 6, so tomorrow, the 5th, at 6, 234 Hyde Street, Faithful Fools, Tenderloin votes. Yes?
I also want to bring up a thing that we would be really opposed to, but like we need to like respond to. There's this rally for housing in front of City Hall, May 10th, at around 12:30 to 2 o'clock, and there's a lot of like people from this awful organization called BARF, and you want to organize like sort of around that, around like, you know, responding to
Some of Fernando's favorite people.
sort of organize around like, you know, responding to that and saying we need, it's not enough that we need housing, we need affordable and deeply affordable housing. So if you feel like, you know, organizing something around that, either as like a counter or as like a response, like just putting it out there.
So that's going to be when?
March,
On May 10th?
they're holding the rally at on May 10th.
So that's a Tuesday?
In front of City Hall.
Okay, so that's right before the board meeting, okay, all right. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Upcoming events? Oh, all right, hearing none, okay.
Oh, I have another one. Basically, like, there's actually going to be a state senate debate, like, about, like, because, like, homelessness has come up a lot in these things, like, it's between Scott Wiener and Jane Kim. There's one that's going to be on May 13th at, like, 6 o'clock at, like, it's like at Mercy Housing's like place, like right below the Caltrain station. So it's on 4th Street, right below the Caltrain station. I forget what it is. It's something connected with Mercy Housing. So
Okay.
Channel.
4th and Channel, yeah.
Okay.
1084th, right?
1084th, yeah, that's.
1084th Street, okay. All right, well, Wendy could help me out with something around, that's all right. She likes to see me suffer.
You have such.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Wait a minute, get some paper. Hang on. All right, so what'd you say? So there's an upcoming debate?
Between state senate candidate Scott
Okay.
Wiener and Jane Kim.
Okay, is
On
it,
homelessness.
It's not just about homelessness, but homelessness is going to be one of the subjects. So.
all right, so it's Friday, May 13th, okay? Could be, all right, if you're superstitious. All right.
And at 6
1084?
Yes.
It's at Mercy Housing's like community building or something.
Okay, 6 p.m. All right.
Put out Channel, like, because Channel's across the street.
Okay, Channel, okay.
The entrance is the green gate on Channel.
The Green Gate, okay, and not twice, okay. All right. Okay, something like that, the juke joint. All right. Huh?
And the password is.
Yes, the password is. All right.
I'll throw one more since we got.
Okay. Yep, all right, Curtis.
So, coming up next Wednesday, next Wednesday, May 18th, it's at 4 o'clock at the Dolph Hotel. 950 Market Street is a huge development, getting ready to go right here in the Tenderloin, on Church Street and Taylor, basically. It's a luxury development, luxury condos and tourist hotel. So we're having a big open community meeting to confront the developer, Group I. It's gonna be at the Dolph Hotel, 4 o'clock, next Wednesday, May 18th. The 9:50.
So it's
just one time, yeah. Wednesday.
It's two weeks from today, all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's like 30 Church Street. Yeah.
May 18th, okay, 4 p.m.?
Yep.
Community meeting, okay, got it.
All right, Joe Wilson for president.
How about that? All right, the Dolph Hotel. All right, so, let's see, how am I doing, Ms. Marie? You're good? All right, so I'll close with a story here. So another campfire tale. Oh my goodness, gonna keep talking. So, anybody ever read this book, Bowling Alone? Everybody, it's Colleen? All right. So, written quite a few years ago. So the sociologist, this Harvard sociologist, Robert Putnam, actually studied civic engagement in of all places in Sicily. And he makes the case that the more engaged the citizenry is of a particular community, the more accountable and more responsible the elected leaders are. Right? He's making that connection. And he also, the theme of bowling alone really is using this metaphor of bowling leagues. Like in the 50s, there used to be thousands and thousands and thousands of bowling leagues around the country. That's what people did. Everybody remember Rock and Bowl here?
Oh,
In
yeah.
Arizona, right? Anything out there? It's not there anymore. But he makes the case that over the past 50 years, there's been a dramatic decline in people joining things, right? Being a part of neighborhood associations, community groups, labor unions, their faith community, right? And he's making the case that that's actually directly tied to the explosion of the use of technology in a community. And he looks at the growth of access to computers and all of that, and how, I remember when I was growing up, I tell this a lot, that one of the things that kept me out of trouble when I was a kid is that too many people knew me, right? And worse than that, too many people knew my mother, right? So, you know, and so that kept you out of trouble. By the time you got home, your mother already knew the story, right? Right? She just wanted to hear you tell it, right? So, and people have retreated indoors. That's the argument he's making, that we've actually privatized our own leisure time, right? We've retreated from each other into ourselves. So he starts the book with this story about these two guys. One is an older black guy named John. He's in his 60s, and a younger white dude named Andy, right? So they didn't grow up in the same neighborhood. Their kids don't go to the same schools. They don't work at the same job. The only way they know each other is this bowling league, right? They're bowling partners. All right, so John gets sick. The older black guy gets sick. He winds up in the hospital. Turns out he needs a kidney transplant. He's on a waiting list for 3.5 months when Andy walks into the hospital and offers to give up one of his kidneys for the guy that he bowls with. So we got big problems, serious problems in our society, in our community, but the solution to those problems start by doing the simple things together, like bowling together. All right? Okay. All right, so I want to thank folks for their participation and their authenticity that they brought to this discussion. I want to acknowledge, first and foremost, the badass crew at the Coalition on Homelessness. A special shout out to Colleen from St. Anthony. For all of her hard work, I wanted to make sure I didn't miss he had one thing to do and he forgot that. We want to acknowledge our co-sponsors today's event, Episcopal Community Services. Kids in the back, the red area, the Gubbio Project, Dolores still here. Focus Family Services, Drug Policy Alliance, Amy from St. Francis Challenge, and Dolores Street Community Services, Dolores Street, the Homeless Youth Alliance, the Eviction Defense Collaborative, ESPA, the Homeless Emergency Service Providers Association, Dolores still here, the Mission Neighborhood Resource Center, Source to Plowshares, Hamilton Family Center, the Cave Housing Alliance, the folks at RAP, the Western Regional Advocacy Project, and Hospitality House. All right, so take it away, Ms. Marie. All right.
Everyone, round of applause for Drew!
advocacy. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. We have dinner over here for you. So there's some burritos from El Metate. There's beef, chicken, and veggie, and then chips and guacamole. So we invite you all to have some food, hang out, further the discussions. And just to remind you, make sure that you sign in the sign-in sheet. We got your email address. We're going to be compiling all the notes from the small groups and putting together a report from today's town hall that we will hopefully all be using in our advocacy. And just a round of applause for today's meeting.